Hi, everyone. I'm Jack and Janice. And right now, there are millions of children, millions trying to fall asleep at night on the floor. But Luke Mickelson, the founder of Sleep in Heavenly Peace, created a movement that's changing what it means to truly show up for others. And he decided that this is no longer acceptable. This is a story about action, impact, and refusing to ignore what truly matters. Luke Mickelson, up next. Luke Mickelson, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Well, thanks, Jackie. It's good to be kinda back, I guess. We've been
It
we've been
is.
trying to get this scheduled for a while, haven't we?
I know, but you're here right now, so that's great. So, you're the founder of Sleep in Heavenly Peace, a movement built on one simple idea that no child should have to sleep on the floor. When you hear that said out loud, and I'm sure you've heard that many times, and of
Mhm.
course you've seen it, what does that mean to you?
Oh, well, it's my passion now,
Yeah,
when back in 2012 when I didn't know that children were sleeping on the floor. I didn't know that child bedlessness was a problem. I mean, I kinda went through life oblivious like everybody. We don't know how bad it is, at least I didn't, and the minute you realize it and for me, it was just one family at first, in my small town, here I'm sitting in a meeting, and we were talking about people we were helping in my church meeting, people we were helping in the ward or excuse me, in the congregation or people that we were helping in the community. Well, this one family came up that we were talking about, and it was really interesting because I'm from a small town, right? 4,000 people, really small. I've ridden my bike all over this town for since I was 5, but they lived in this part of town I didn't even know existed. That's how remote it was. So when they talked about it, it kind of perked my ear up. And then the leader that actually entered the home and was helping out, she talked about the things that they needed. The
yeah.
mom needed rides to work and the kids didn't have any beds. And of course they need clothes and food and stuff. And I said, wait a minute, did you just say the kids don't have any beds? Like, what do you mean? Like they got mattresses, right? And she said, no, no, they're just sleeping on the hardwood floor.
Oh,
And that
Jesus.
right there, Jackie, I mean, I think anybody that heard that is gonna it's gonna sink deep,
Yeah,
and
of
for me,
course.
it did. I thought about my own kids. I had 3 kids at the time, and I thought, man, I to have them sleep on the floor day in and day out, that would be rough, so that was my first reaction to child bedlessness.
Of course. So how big has this problem become compared to what you experienced at first in the beginning?
Well, I don't know if it's gotten bigger, it's just gotten more exposed, and that was kind of the surprise to me. See, I took my Boy Scouts because I was the leader of the Boy Scouts, and we built that a first bunk bed, our very first bunk bed, and delivered it to this family. Now, I'd never built furniture before in my life, but, being a farm kid and kinda knowing my way around some tools, I took the Boy Scouts and took an Xbox controller out of their hands and put a drill in it and, taught them something, right?
Good.
And we had a great time, But the delivery of the beds, I didn't get to go on it because the Boy Scouts went with their parents, but they told me how amazing it was, right? And it filled my bucket, my fulfillment bucket, my purpose bucket immediately, and it was at a time in my life that I really needed it, kinda going through a little bit of a crisis, midlife crisis or a faith crisis. So it was really awesome, but then the next weekend came around and life kind of went back to normal and I was kind of falling in this little pit of despair that I was in kind of. And anyways, I wanted my kids to have the same experience that my Boy Scouts did. And so we went and built another bunk bed. And I didn't know what to do with it because I thought I had solved child bedlessness in my town.
Yeah.
We took care of the one kid and or the one family rather that I knew had some trouble. But I had this bunk bed we finished and we had a great time with my kids, but I didn't know what to do with it, so someone recommended, "Why don't you throw it on, one of these buy sell trades on Facebook groups?" And,
Yeah.
this was 14 years ago. I didn't know these things even existed.
Yeah.
So
And
so that's what we did. We threw it on there, and that's when I realized two things happened, right? The first thing, we got a lot of people that commented on that post, and people I had no idea who they were. I understand now how that works, but also, friends that I hadn't talked to for years, they all commented, and there was a lot of them. And the second shocking thing is what they commented about. They all knew kids that were sleeping on the floor somewhere, and then the conditions that they were sleeping in. That's when I was like, "Wait a minute, what?" this is going on in my very small town, a small community, and there are kids sleeping on pallets, sleeping on hardwood floors, concrete floors, 3 or 4 of the same bed, on couches, I mean, all sorts of conditions, but certainly not their own bed, not even their own mattress.
Uh,
And that's when I was like, "Okay, what we need to do something about this,"
so you know what, Luke, I gotta ask you, what did your life look like before all of this started, before sleep in heavenly peace?
Yeah. It was great, I think on paper, most people would have died to have what I had, I had a great job, I was getting paid well, and I'm married, 3 kids, was coaching, football, was in my church service, working with the youth. I mean, on paper, it was awesome, and I would never wanted to change it. But for me personally, I think, Jackie, we reached this time or period in life, and I was about 35. It seems like it's right around there where you kind of start questioning, what is it that's most important to me?
Yeah,
Almost like, what's my purpose? What do I believe? You start having to face some of these questions that maybe in the past you swept under the rug a little bit or just didn't want to deal with it, or maybe even not even mature enough to really handle it yet. Well, I felt like I was there. I felt like my measurement of success was how many zeros are behind my paycheck, right? Or how many
right.
toys I had in the garage. And that all of a sudden really didn't matter to me anymore. I didn't care if I lived in a mansion or I lived in a shack. So so when you start going through this, it really throws you for a tailspin because now you feel a little lost. And that's where I was. I was questioning my faith. I was questioning my purpose of life and why I'm here. And it was in the middle of all of this. And this had been going on for several years, kind of internally. No one really knew about it. I wanted to figure out what was most important. I wanted to figure out when I die, what do I want to be remembered for? What do I want? I want to leave something behind that's meaningful. And when this project came about, it wasn't something like I went, "Aha, this is it. I'm gonna fulfill everything my heart's desire," right? Not at all. It was just a cool thing that I wanted my Boy Scouts to do, and then I wanted my kids to learn, and it just slowly started developing into, "Hey, there's more need out here. I love doing it. I love working with people, bringing the community together. I love power tools, right? Building with wood and then to solve that problem, to solve an issue like that, I figured it was well worth my time."
So, you say there's a lot of meat out there, but what's something that people really don't understand about this issue and that they may not want to even think about?
Yeah. Well, it's just that. They don't know this exists like me. I mean, everybody back then and most of the country now still have no clue that child bedlessness, and I use the word bedlessness, it's not even a real word, right? Every
Yeah,
time I
yeah.
type it, I've got the little red line that goes underneath it, that
Right,
bugs the crap out of me. But I like using the irony of it is beautiful because even the word itself doesn't know it exists and or that it doesn't exist. And you know, that's the problem. You can't fix a problem if you don't know
right.
it's not non-existent. And I learned this as we started building more beds, as we learned about more kids. Of course, we shared what we were doing on Facebook, and the more we shared, the more kids popped up that needed help, and the more volunteers wanted to show up and help. It was really interesting, and I kind of started to realize how unsolved this problem was when we decided to be a charity a couple years after we started this. It wasn't going to be a Christmas project anymore. It was going to be an actual, a charity. And I'd never ran a charity before. I'd started a lot of businesses and I knew how to do that, but I didn't know how to run a charity. So I'd do what I think anybody would do. You start looking in the internet trying to find another charity that's doing what you're doing. And I found one in the entire country, only one that was providing beds for kids. That was shocker number one. And then shocker number 2 was, again, as we shared and showed the public what we were doing in my hometown, I
Yeah.
started getting calls from all sorts of social workers, CASA, Child Protective Services, these agencies that work with these families. And I was like their favorite guy. Like I was, and they told me because providing beds for children in these conditions is typically the single hardest thing for them to get, over couches and fridges and TV. Those are easy compared to getting a bed for a child, and
Why?
mostly that was
Why is that?
well, mostly I think it's because there was no agency doing it. There's a lot of agencies that provide food, clothing, shelter, toys, coats, bicycles, These are agencies that have been around for a while and know the problem and quite frankly deal with these issues. But no one knew about child bedlessness. No one knew that there was kids sleeping on the floor. And if they did know, that nothing was being done about it. And so, I kind of took it as a personal charge. Literally, our mission statement came from a frustrating statement that I said right at the very beginning, no kid is going to sleep on the floor in my town if I have anything to do with it. Right. I really felt that way. And what I didn't realize, Jackie, was, yeah, that's a tall order to ask that no kid is gonna sleep on the floor. Because it really, later on, we've come up with some rough statistics. It's greater than 3% of the total population of really any given town on average. So if you're in a town of 100,000 people, there's 3,000 kids sleeping on the floor.
Oh my God.
There's 12 plus million kids, 18 and under the poverty line that we know a good majority, if not most of them, don't have beds to sleep in. And right now, here's the sad reality.
Yeah.
We're nationwide. We cover 440 chapters. We're in almost every state. We're in 4 countries. And as you and I sit here and talk, there's over 150,000 kids that are sleeping on the floor, right? Well, excuse me, there's 150,000 kids on our waiting list, just waiting for beds that we know of, right? And the sad reality, we only cover about 28% of the United States geographically. So there's 70% that still don't even know that we exist. So you can imagine if we're at 150,000 kids at 28%, I mean, what would it be like at 90%? There's just so many kids out there, and the problem is because no one knows that this is an issue.
So, but I want to talk about the impact that you've made, the difference that you've made, Luke. To date, how many beds have you provided?
This summer, coming up here just in a few short months, we will have built over 400,000 beds for
Wow.
kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the impact, you think you're bringing that up, Jackie, because this is important. And I tell everybody, listen, if you could just stop for a moment what you're doing. Let me tell you one story before I share
Yeah.
this. And this is my very first delivery, right? So like many of you might be listening right now, if maybe you've seen a condition that a child's been in that didn't have a bed, but if you haven't, let me paint the picture of what it looked like for me, right? When me and my kids built this first bed together and didn't know what to do with it, and we threw it on Facebook and had all these comments, I wanted this bed to go to a special situation, right? I mean, they're all special, but I really wanted it to go to one that really needed it. And well, a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, Luke, have you delivered that bed yet?" And I said, "No, not yet." And she's like, "Let me tell you a story of Haley. Haley's a 6-year-old girl that had never slept on a bed before. She'd only slept in the backseat of her mom's car and which was shocking to hear, right? But it was exactly the situation I wanted, right? Just someone that really, really needed a child that really deserved it. And so I loaded up this bed, and me and my buddy went out to deliver it to Haley's house. They just got a house, right? That's why we could deliver it to it. My friend helped them get a house, and they were trying to get things figured out. And well, I've walked into a situation like this before, right? We've helped homelessness, we've helped poverty, but I never really went into a situation looking it through the eyes of a 6-year-old. And that really kind of shocked me. You realize there's not a couch or a TV to watch cartoons on. There's not a kitchen table. There was nothing in this house, right? So you start recognizing some of these things. The only thing was there was a hot plate that had a can of soup on it, and that was dinner. But Haley, this little 6-year-old girl, so excited to have a house, so excited to have something that she could show off to these strange dudes, right? I was shocked and she didn't know why we were there. I was shocked she was so excited. I leaned down, I said, "Haley, why don't you show me your bedroom?" So she took us back to her bedroom. Well, you can imagine what this looked like. It was holes in the carpet and tears in the wallpaper. The closet door was missing. I mean, really shocking things. But the most shocking was when I looked in the corner and there was a pile of clothes. And that's was Haley's nest. That's what she slept on. So she'd come home from school, she'd put her PJs on, then sleep on her school clothes, pants for a blanket and shirt for a pillow, and then the next day put them back on and go to school. I'd never seen that before. That really, really hurt. I was almost mad at first, like this is going on in my hometown. Heck no. But then I got pretty excited because we had brought this bed for Haley, and so we started bringing it in and putting it together. And I was watching Haley to see. what her reaction would be like once she figured it out. And she did not disappoint, you know, once she realized it, it was like 10 Christmases. She just was so happy,
Yeah.
ran over and gave me and this strange dude, these 2 crazy guys gave us a hug, and then she did something I never ever saw before. She went and hugged and kissed the bed. I mean, to have a child kiss something as ordinary and simple as a bed, I mean, that tells you something, right? And if that wasn't enough, Jackie, to just rip your heart out, I look up and here's mom, and I did not expect this, right? Single mom, you know, 6 years of tears rolling down this lady's face, and I was raised by a single mom too, so I knew what those meant. I knew the guilt and the worry and the shame and the frustration of not being able to provide something as simple as a bed for her child, you know? I knew right then and there, it just hit me. This is way more than a bed,
Yeah.
it's way more. And back to your answer, and I tell people, listen, because this is what I did. I took a moment, in that weight of that moment, and I thought for a second, what would it be like to not have a bed? What would it be like to be a child and not have a bed? You know, let's talk about just the physical effects. They wake up, they're probably sore, they didn't get a good night's sleep, right? They call it waking up on the wrong side of the bed for a reason. They're not in a good mood. They woke up on the wrong side of whatever. Then they go to school. Well, they're not ready to learn. They're in a bad mood. They probably don't make very good friends. They don't pay attention. They can get in trouble. You know, teachers don't have a hard time pointing out the kids that possibly did not sleep well that night, right? And that's just the physical part of it. Now think about the mental and the emotional toll that can play on a kid. These children, they don't have sleepovers, they don't have friends come over and hang out in their rooms because they're embarrassed by it. So they end up going to their friend's house, right? And little Johnny, he's not only got a bed, he's got throw pillows. What kind of a mental, image or mental feeling that those kids get when they see that? And worse yet, Jackie, when you and I have a bad day, the
Yeah.
boss was hard, lost a client, you know, whatever, or worse yet, we're sick, we got the flu. Tell me, what is the one place on the planet that any of us just want to crawl into and escape the world? It's our bed,
Yeah.
right? These kids don't have that. That's just the reality of what a bed does provide for a child and what happens when they don't have one. It's just, there's a lot more. It's more than just a good night's sleep. Yeah.
Of course. Sorry, I just listening to this, it's breaking my heart. What do people tend to get wrong about the families you're helping?
Oh, it's a great question. I took my brother-in-law on a delivery once,
Yeah.
and it was really interesting. And I tell all my chapter presidents, listen, we are there for the child. We're not there for anybody else, right? These kids are in these situations not because of their choices, right? Absolutely not, right? And sometimes it's not even the choice of the parents. It's just a rotten, terrible situation, a house fire, a loss of job, had to move, in a hurry for whatever reason. But the kids certainly didn't choose this. And so they're suffering from it, right? So when we go into a house to deliver beds, I don't I couldn't care less if they had $1,000,000 in the closet, right? If the kid's not gonna have a bed, I'll provide them one.
Yeah.
So when you go in with that mentality, you're never disappointed, right? It doesn't matter whether the parents get off the couch to help or not. The kid's certainly happy. So that's the first thing I tell him. And then I told my brother-in-law, I said, because we went to this house and it was a kind of it was a bigger home, an older home, but it's a bigger home, and they had a big, huge, big screen TV and I remember my brother-in-law made a comment. He was a little frustrated, and
Yeah.
he said, "Man, they got a bigger TV than I do." And I could tell I know what he meant by that, right? And I looked at him, I said, "You know what? You're right. But keep in mind that TV was probably donated." And you could see he, like, realized, right?
Of
So it
course.
it becomes very hard not to judge because
Yes.
you don't know the circumstances, and quite frankly, when you start thinking of things outside of the child, right, you can probably get yourself pretty frustrated.
Yeah.
But when you realize, "Look, I don't care what the situation is. If this kid is not gonna sleep on the carpet anymore, right, I'm gonna put a bed underneath this child so he or she has a better chance at life." And that just helps, let's just say that.
Yeah, of course. So
Yeah.
how has this changed the way you define a good life?
Oh, well, for the volunteer, I'll just speak for myself as the volunteer. It's saved my life. I mean, what I mean by that is it's given my life passion and purpose. And I speak about this in my keynote speaking is making passion purpose. Because if we go through life without purpose, man, it's what's the point almost? It can put you in a pretty dark place. And I was heading down that road and I knew I didn't want that. I wanted to feel like I had meaning, like there's a reason why I'm here. And better yet, how can I as a human being help another human being? We're all on this big blue dot together. We got to figure out how to work together, how to make it if it's gonna be better, Jackie, then it's up to us. I'm not gonna wait for someone else to make it better for me. I'm gonna do something about that. So, as a volunteer, I really value service. I tell people, "Listen, if you want true joy in life, you really do want true joy, stop looking at yourself and see how you can help someone else out. Your problems, they're not gonna go away, of course not. But what they will do is seem far less heavy. It's kinda like having a monster in the closet, right? If you
Yes.
don't open the closet door to look at this monster, your mind's gonna make it as big and as ugly as it possibly can,
Right.
right?
Right. But
Service
look,
just
there are so
somehow
many people though saying, "I'm just one person. What could I
yeah.
do?"
I tell everybody, Jack, I'm a farm kid from Idaho. It doesn't get much more simpler than that, right? People see on podcasts or TV and they hear about you and they put you on this pedestal and, oh, well, he can do it, but I can't. Oh, no, no, no. I'm not going to give you any excuses, right? If a farm kid from Idaho can do it, then you can too. And I really want to make that point because this started out as some dad in some state, in some town and house, just wanted to teach his kids something. And then after that, the decisions to act and to continue to act were far easier, and I think that's one of the most important lessons I learned, Jackie, is, listen, we all wanna change. We all wanna make change. We all wanna be a part of the change for the good and to move forward, so, yes, we all have that in us, right? So, focusing on wanting to change. Okay, good, you've got it, but that's the wrong it's the wrong step to focus in on. It's the next step that makes all the difference, and that's the desire to act on that change, right? If you don't act, then it's still just a dream, and it'll remain a dream, right? So, I try to teach people, and this is what I did, you know, I wanted to change. I knew I needed to change. I was in this rut, right? And I finally hit a point, especially when my kids were talking about all the toys that they wanted for Christmas and, here I just built a bed for a child that didn't have one, and they've got a bed and they should be appreciated. I mean, all these dad moments came to my mind. And it increased my desire to act more than my desire to change. So now that I had a much stronger desire to act, I got my butt off the couch, went out to the garage, we built another bed, delivered it, and then if that didn't change it, I don't know what would. I wanted to do more. And hence now we've built almost 400,000 beds
Uh,
for kids, and
uh,
and and I found out there's millions of people just like me that are looking for ways to give back. They just don't know how, you
yeah.
know. And the experience that building and delivering a bed to a child does to someone, and I've heard this many times that, building and delivering a bed for a child it was the most fulfilling service that people have ever done, and I get it. Number 1, it's not easy. You build a bed, you're using tools and raw lumber and, you're there for 4 hours sanding and hammering and drilling and sawing and doing all this stuff. The next day we call it post body build for a reason. But you feel fulfilled, Jackie,
Yes.
it's like working out, the next
Uh,
day, if you're really, really sore, you're super proud. I mean,
yeah.
it's kinda stinks to be sore,
Yeah.
but it's a signal, it signifies how well you worked, and that's what I think people miss out when they do service or wanna serve or even nonprofits that provide service. They make it too easy sometimes for the volunteers. That's the whole experience, that's almost the point, right? I tell people, "Listen, just follow your tiny moments, right? You might not change the world, but you're going to change someone's world. And you know what? That someone might just be you. And that's okay. Get yourself right, you
Yeah.
know, and then you can learn how to help other people. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned.
But it might be you, but you're also making a big difference in that child's life and creating
Oh,
happiness.
oh yeah.
Yeah. So when people finish listening to this conversation, Luke,
Mm,
what do you hope that they feel compelled to do next
yeah.
immediately?
My biggest ask is the simplest one, right? Look, I'm a nonprofit. You can go to our website, shpbeds.org. You can donate money. You can find the local chapter and see what they're doing, get involved. You can start a chapter. You can apply for a child in your own hometown for yourself, for someone 5 states over, right? Help us find these kids. Let's get them beds. Those are all things that you can do, and I would encourage you all. But the simplest thing I ask you, and the reason why, Jackie, thank you for having me on, is we just need to get the word out. Child bedlessness is a real problem, and it's right next door. I promise you, take some time, go ask a school counselor, go ask a first responder. Are there kids that don't have beds in our town? You're gonna find out real quick that there are. And now that you know about it, what are you gonna do about it, right?
Yeah.
So the first step is just letting people know. Share this podcast, share what you learned today, get it out there. I promise you, you're gonna raise eyebrows when you said, "Hey, you know what? Do you know that there's 3% of kids in our town that don't have beds?" People won't believe you.
Yeah.
Trust me. And now you can be the one to bring this out and expose this so we can then work together on it and solve it.
I know we're going to include your information in the show notes,
Mhm.
but where can people reach you? What's your website?
Oh, I'm everywhere. You type
I
in
know.
Luke Mickelson, you're gonna find me. I I spend a lot of time on Facebook and LinkedIn. That's probably my biggest platforms that I like to connect with, and I'm on all of them. It's either Luke Mickelson or SHP Luke. You'll find me, and reach out. I love answered questions. I travel the country doing keynote speeches and of inspiration, business tactics, leadership evolution, that kind of stuff. I love sharing this message because without it, without us doing it together, finding these kids and sharing with other people that may wanna get involved, that may wanna change some little human's life, it starts with letting them know about it, so.
It does. It does. There's no surprise that you're recognized by CNN. My God. But and I had to say that. Sorry, I was thinking it
Oh, that's okay.
20 minutes, but I had to say it out loud. And I just have to end by saying one thing. It's amazing to me, Luke, that and a reminder too that change doesn't start with resources. It starts with one decision that one person can make and how that can ripple and change thousands of lives. So thank you for leading by example and making a difference. Thank you so much.
Oh. Oh, Jackie, thanks for having me on. This is great, and I hope and listen, people don't think a podcaster enough, right? It's because of you and your time, personal money I know you've put into this, right? You could have been doing better things, but no, you wanted to use a platform to air out and share stories like mine. Thank you for doing that. That means a lot, and our world's only gonna get better when we have people like yourself that wanna share, so,
The two of us, absolutely. Thank you so much, Luke. I really appreciate your time and I thank you so much for the difference that you're making.
thank you.
I these stories for several reasons. One is to bring attention to a certain cause or to try to make a difference in someone's life. Tonight, somewhere a child will sleep safely for the very first time because someone refused to look away. Will you? If this story moved you, please don't just listen. Take the necessary action and steps. Share this, become involved, and be part of something bigger than yourself. Until next time, thank you for watching. I'm Jackie Denise. Be well.